This morning's podcast, we're going to be talking about government control on rental prices. Should the government freeze rents? Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Morning Minutes. Myself, Michael Bergio, Josh Wapshot, episode 1702, Government Control of Rental Prices, Solution or Bigger Problem? Josh, this has been a hot topic, I think, for at least the last decade. Government control with rental prices, with loans, with buying, with marketing. Let's try and keep it quite specific to rental pricing. What's your view on the government control? Maybe describe what it would look like, maybe a benefit if there is one, and then we can talk about some cause and effects.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, the Greens Party have put this in the spotlight again, most recently yesterday. A couple of proposals they're speaking about is one, a rent freeze, immediate rent freeze, so no yearly increases. They're talking about no limiting evictions during rent freezes, so what you can kick your tenant out for. They're trying to cap your rental increases, and they're proposing numbers such as 2% every 24 months. And then they also are looking at putting together a rental board body. So an independent body that then goes and regulates, looks after that rental space. So quite a few changes in there. Obviously, I don't agree with any government interference. Wherever we see red tape in any market, we generally see a less efficient market. And it doesn't tend to go too well for investors. And that's what I see here, Michael. I don't typically agree with these rent freezes. If you imagine interest rates where they are now, inflation where it's heading, if you're talking about a 2% rental increase, well, the longer you hold the property, the more it sort of eats into your margins even further. So really going to be a tricky one. Obviously rents are also a driving force of house prices. So if we begin to see, most of the positives out of owning property leave the market, well, so will buyers. So interesting bit of information. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you said it right. It hammers investors, but obviously there's a big portion of the country who's like, screw the investors. I can't afford to live where I am. Like, I need assistance. And that's granted. That's probably more of the country than the investor market. But what that section of the economy, of the voter pool, don't understand, it's almost like that saying goes full circle. So let's say if you cap rents and you make it not desirable for an investor to buy property, therefore it's not desirable for an investor to build more apartments. Therefore, there's less supply of properties in the market. Therefore, rents go up regardless of the cap, because they will eventually come empty. The pricing will go up. And what's even more impactful for a country like Australia to do what we're doing to the property market, our wealth creation is property. So anything we do to negative impact property, that impacts the whole economy. When other countries, for example, like America, where it's not so property driven, their wealth creation, it's more entrepreneurship. And you can just look at the ASX compared to the American Stock Exchange. When banks are our biggest companies, that's not good. They don't offer a product. Compared to, like, you may not like Elon Musk, but at least he's inventing stuff that didn't exist and offering something for people to buy. Amazon hurt small businesses, but at least invented something. Banks, it's made up of fees from our money. But back to like the rents. That's like the biggest thing people miss is, and everyone hates development because they don't necessarily, because like I find you can't have your cake and eat it as well. You can't have development legal and then not do it well. And that's where our country's been, especially Northern Beaches, for so long. Everyone complains about affordability, but no one wants development, but development's legal. So development's done basically half-assed. There's not big enough density to actually offer what people need, i.e., you've only got 3-level height limit and you only can fit 1 car space per property. Where if you said, we'll give you more height here and we want 2-3 cars per property, because the reality is nearly every household has 2 to 3 cars. But we're going to give you the high height, build something bigger and better, but we're not going to give you density in more like housing areas. And that's why there's been the uproar with the state government basically just coming in and saying we're changing everywhere, because council couldn't basically pick their town centres and go, we need density to bring rents down, to bring prices down. And this is what I think a lot of people get confused with. And the name of the Affordable Housing Act doesn't help either. We've done we've bought a lot of boarding houses on low cost accommodation studio apartments. Now, just because that building was approved under low cost accommodation does not mean that it will be the cheapest studio in the marketplace. And it took me a while for the penny to drop, even in my head, in the industry, because I was like, how's this affordable? This is the most expensive studio on the Northern Beaches. And it wasn't until I used the analogy of cars. We're in 2026. This year's model does not get cheaper until next year's come out. Or last year's model does not, the 2005 model does not drop in price until the 2006 model comes out. Same as your iPhone. The last year's model or the current one doesn't get cheaper until the brand new one comes out. It's the same with property. You need to build and increase the supply, which you need investors for, you need builders for, to keep the pricing down. So capping the rents, and you said it spot on, you're just going to kill the investors to mean there's less units to pick from. And then the other bloody crisis, you could call it, is immigration. When you're bringing in a net positive 200,000 people, I think, what was New South Wales? Net 250,000 this year. If you're not even building that as a minimum, then the more pricing is going to go up. So you've almost got to, you don't want to stop immigration, but it's like it's instead of it being done through government control, it's through the free market. Developers would love to charge you 500 grand for that unit instead of 1 million if they can make their 10%, build it for less, pay less taxes. Like the build cost at the moment on brand new apartments has gone to 10,000 a square meter. It has doubled since COVID. And there was a year of legitimacy of that being the build cost, actual cost, through the supply chain being disrupted. And I was even guilty of using that as an excuse until I heard, I don't know if you follow Tom Hawley, great podcast, someone else. They basically said the taxes on new construction and everything doubled since COVID. So effectively, let's say for a year's time, steel went from $20 to $50 and it was going to drop back down to 20. The government was like, oh, people said they'll pay 50 for it. We're going to increase the tax to 50. So you're still paying 50. Everyone's happy with 50. And like on a $1.2 million house and land package, it is $560,000 of government charges, fees and charges. So even right now, in today's crazy market where we say things are not affordable, if we wiped out the government fees and charges, and in all essence, we're all getting it on our income, they're getting it everywhere else. If they just said our wealth is through property, let's just make that industry flourish. Let's get rid of all those charges. You could then buy a house and land for $560,000. And how much rent would you need to charge for it then? Half. So it's
100%. They don't look at it that way.
Like, and that's where the danger is. And you know what the bloody crap in that thing the sneaky thing they said in that thing we showed, created another government body. So that means it raises the government spending to pay more employees to manage this rent freeze. So therefore, they need to tax our income more to pay for that employee, just make sure the rent doesn't go up. So it doesn't help. It doesn't do well.
Yeah.
And I think it, like, yeah, I think that's a good little rant there.
I think when you were starting earlier, I heard a good analogy. I think it was around like, your international CEOs and how they pay tax. And, there was complaints around like, hey mate, you earn this, and this, and you're paying this tax rate. And he goes, well, I also employ thousands of people, create new jobs. Like, it's a two-way street. You've got to create opportunity for these pioneers, and generally, that positive outcome then, bleeds through the community or, the surrounding people. So, you need that opportunity there. Like we just said, you need the ability for investors to see property as an investment, where they're going to see a return. And we need those prices where they need to be for build costs and developers for it to make sense. And whether that's, reducing the red tape, or, some sort of benefit to resources and, some sort of cutback to developers based on costs. I mean, that's pretty much the only thing that I can see in the market that's really going to make any change. And that's by playing with supply.
Yes. And that's where, like, that's sort of like what they don't want you to know. They think they convince you that the government's the issue. No, the government's the solution, and it's not we the people. It's we build the way through it. Like, and you've just got to think of it on simple terms. Think of it like the grocery store. If the grocery store ordered 100 bananas instead of 10 for that month, they're going to discount the shit out of those bananas to sell them. It's the same with property. If you may hate development, but if you want affordable, let's just say it went crazy. And instead of building 10,000 units, we built 100,000 units. Do you know how cheap they would be? Like, we have developments where we've got the last 5 or last 10 warehouses, apartments, whatever it is. When you're at that end of that development and they're not selling, they lower the price. But if you make it so undesirable for investors, then they don't build. Therefore, there is no leftover. It's everything snapped up, and there's always going to be wealthy people. So they're just going to pay more than you. So you may think the rent freeze will protect you. It just means you're less likely to get it when it comes back on the market because the wealthy people will get it. So you just need to make it affordable for everyone. And yeah, typically when the government moves the check piece here, it hammers you there.
Exactly. But I tell you what, Michael, I started to see it, as soon as these budget changes came through. They really are gearing people away from residential property. Without saying you don't buy it through these policy changes, they're essentially, taking away majority of the incentive. And when you start comparing commercial property on the basis of negative gearing, on the basis of if they bring something like these rent controls in, commercial property, you're generally receiving anywhere between sort of 4 or 5% increases a year. All of a sudden, when you compare to that 24 months, 2% increases, really start to see the shift towards investment over in the commercial sector in the foreseeable future, based on just all this policy change, where this government is headed. I mean, the playing field always changes. You've just got to change your tactics, and I mean, everything's sort of showing us. The last thing the Greens did was, to pass all these things through the Senate, was for Labor to push through non-leverage in your self-managed super fund for residential property. Guess what? You can still do that in commercial. Plenty of transactions going through that way. So it just seems as though every point's gearing us towards, they're really taking the attractiveness away from resi. And, that money's got to go somewhere. So starting to see the early signs of a re-emerging commercial market.
Which I'm pumped for. I probably do commercial, but what I'm not pumped for is what stimulates commercial property is small business. And what stimulate, I remember hearing this, it was like years ago, every dollar spent in like residential property, it's like $6 in the economy, if you or something insane like that, and you can imagine like when you're buying, selling, moving, you get removalists, you get cleaners, you get renovations, you get solicitors, you get agents, like, and if you stop that market, the government's like, what's that saying where like you bite your nose off to save your or whatever it is, because that's effectively what it is. And a perfect example is tobacco. Now, whenever it was, they made the changes. The revenue for tobacco was 6 billion or 16 billion, or 12 billion, something
crazy.
massive, yeah. 12 billion a year. And the government was like, we want more revenue, and we want you to, so we're going to increase the tax. And do you know what their revenue was for the following year or quarter? 4 billion. It went down 70% because you know what happened? It went to the illegal black market. Not getting taxed. Where do you think all that, like there was a current affair thing about they arrested some crime person in Melbourne today for all the bombings, like the fire bombings in Melbourne. Like that just stemmed that. Now, that's just a simple way to think of it, and that's what they're doing in the residential market. People stop selling, they stop getting the cleaners, builders start hurting, and then you're just hurting all the economy. And eventually, how many warehouses are rented to tradies? Now imagine if half of them are gone. Now you've killed the commercial market with trying to do nothing to it. So
100%, massive changes, and I'm definitely against the idea of government control on rents.
Agree. Anyway, we can talk about that for a while.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's our 2 cents. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. See you guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.